So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. One of our guys will come find you. Also, just please tell us who you are, where you're from, etc.
Hi, Rob Harrison. I'm Export Advisor of the New South Wales Government, based here in Tamworth. First of all, a comment. Thank you. That was a fascinating session. Really enjoyed it. I was slightly amused by the comment from Andrew Robb, someone who did so much to drive the North Asian Free Trade Agreements, on his views on Brexit. So he obviously knows more about the workings of the EU than perhaps we see from the outside. That was quite interesting. But just on branding, this is probably more for Andrew Cox. As I travel, I love to see the True Aussie brand. It's great. But I think everyone who's in the export space is aware that Australia it's a bit confusing out there in terms of Australia and its product. You know, you've got the States, and then you've got different sectors doing their own thing. We've heard quite a bit over the last 2-3 years, since we've been going for a long time, about Brand Australia. It seems to be rather slow in the pipeline, and it sounds like it's going to be very good if it's taking so long to put together. I don't know, but I think it's how Australia then, if we do launch this brand, how everyone gets behind it and has its own identity, but also has that consistency that Australia needs to really punch above its weight. You know, you see the Britain is Great brands and some of the other ones. Australia hasn't quite got there, and yet we're doing so much right behind it. So maybe just some comments on how we would perhaps take the branding forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. Australia needs a consistent message, in export markets, particularly for food, agricultural products. And that involves the likes of MLA working with partners, whether it's Austrade, state government representatives, but also the likes of horticulture, dairy, etc., the wine industry. And we need a clear and consistent message. Whether or not that means that everything needs to have exactly the same label or brand, I think that's where the difficulty comes in. I don't think any country necessarily has that nailed. So I think first and foremost we need to work more closely together to deliver that clear message. And MLA is working particularly in China recently with HAL and Dairy Australia on joining together to educate trade, etc., about the suite of products we have and the great systems we have across agriculture. It probably won't necessarily result in a single brand, but I personally don't think that is the main end game. True Aussie Beef and True Aussie Lamb have been successful because they're focused on what consumers know and love about our product. The more you water that down, I think the more it gets a little grey. So I'm not sure that we need a single unified brand sticker, you could call it. But certainly we need to work really closely together to unify our clarity of message for what makes consumers buy Australian fresh food in overseas markets, and that should not be single market driven either. It should be centralised and across global markets. The global consumer now is digital, and they're certainly not geographically restricted. So, there's a lot of work that we are doing with all those partners that you mentioned to make sure we have that clarity.
Could I just add? I mean, my sense, and I've been into the region 40 times since I finished in politics 40 months ago. 30 of those are 30 times into China, so I'm seeing a fair bit of stuff on the ground. Australia is the brand, or Aussie, either one. It seems to be interchangeable. There's so much stuff being substituted into being transferred from wherever it came from into a box with Australia on it, that, then underneath that, what brands you have, I think people are entitled to segment some of the market with, a regional, whatever they want to. But there's always been this long-standing debate about the brand, and yet as I roam around, to me it's strong, it's gold standard. And it's not just for agriculture, I go into the health market, same thing, I go into the tourism market. Anything with you've got to have Australia there amongst the mix in order to get the premium.
Any other questions? One at the front here.
Recent trip to Thailand. Working? Yeah. Okay. I wandered into a supermarket in the equivalent of Western Sydney, a fairly big supermarket, but the packaged meat there, they had Australian Scotch fillet steak amongst many other brands, but the price was, it worked out to $200 a kilo. They didn't sell that much of it, I think. It wasn't a brand I recognised at all, but for all that, that was the price that they were asking for it there. So I'm not sure what the price range that you're selling these products at.
Is that to Lockie?
I'll take that. I'll use an example of one of our customers in Thailand. We supply Macro, which is, again, it's a bit of a hypermarket format. We actually supply a beef line, which 3 cuts of, we do a Scotch fillet sirloin and a eye fillet, which is just cow beef, so just, you know, bottom market. We also do a grain-fed Angus, same 3 cuts, and we do a Wagyu, same 3 cuts. And those Wagyu steaks would be probably around that point, but they've got a single price point on them. We label it in Thai, and we're servicing all that market. In terms of the mix of products, there'd be 60% of the order would be of the beef, just the cow meat, and 25% would be of the grain-fed Angus, and then 15% would be Wagyu. So there's a different market there, and then we'll send them into the DC, but they'll put, for example, in Pattaya and Phuket, there'll be more Wagyu going to those markets, and, you know, to the rest of Thailand, for example. So there's always a consumer. You just got to get the right product to which consumer. So, and there are, I mean, Thailand is a pretty amazing market. Like, it is seriously moving fast. It's a difficult market in terms of the trade as well. Traditionally, Thailand, there's always been a quota period. You get, I think it's 1,000 or 1,500 tonnes of product, which is duty-free, and then it goes to 50% tax. And we've been supplying that market for the last 5 years in that case, and literally we have containers parked off Singapore, and you've got 1,000 tonnes. Usually, as soon as you hit that quota, your tariff is 50% and your meat is 50% more expensive, and the 1,000 tonnes arrives in the first 3 days of January. Can't have the containers in Thailand waters before midnight. But next year that's changing. It's going away. There's a different trade agreement where you can go in on 0% up that. So it's an interesting market. They're all the same in all those markets. You've got different demographics, and you've got to supply the different products to suit every customer.
Couple at the back.
Ash from Sedalia. I wanted first to say thank you to the MLA for this 3 days. We really enjoyed them, and they were very informative days. Sedalia is actually a starting company to export to the Middle East and North Africa, particularly in Egypt. My question is to Lachlan. Have you ever considered sending any of your products to the Middle East and to Egypt? And whether it is something of a profit to your product, or it's a hard market to crack into? Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly do. The Middle East is obviously a more mature market than, for example, Egypt. I think Egypt we did a bit in probably a couple of years ago. There was a big demand for particularly offals, so it is a big market, as I understand at the moment, for offals predominantly. But the Middle East is a very good market. You do need a sort of a global balance. For example, the Middle East is generally the best market for your loin cuts, like your tenderloins particularly, which are very soft in China generally. So we do quite a lot of Wagyu, and that's the best market to be sending your tenderloins, your cube rolls, strip loin generally, and then a lot of the barbecue cuts going into China, and naturally trimming might be going to the US. So you do need a global presence to get the best return for your livestock you're processing. We did initially supply a lot of the retailers in the region. We were doing Carrefour in Qatar. The retail ready side of things is a bit more difficult in the Middle East, but it's a good market. It's always been a very good market for beef and particularly lamb out of Australia. And without having supplied Egypt for the last few years, it was a big demand, particularly for a lot of beef offal. So I hope that answered the question.
Is that Jeff at the front there? Yep.
Yeah. Andrew, to you. And thanks very much for the session, Jamie. This has been fantastic. Andrew, to you, at the end of the Chinese Free Trade Agreement stuff, we talked a lot about what benefits we might gain out of especially sheep meat into India. and yet in the recent times the Indian Free Trade Agreement seems to have fizzled out or not moved anywhere. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's one agreement which I spent a lot of time on and failed. I've been 12 times to India in the last 4.5 years, I think, 5 years, and the bureaucracy there is so protectionist. I met with the Prime Minister Modi 5 times, so that showed every time I had a blockage in the agreement. So here's a Prime Minister looking after 1.2 billion people, but still had time to see a trade minister because he is so committed to opening up the market. And of course the sheep meat was the big one in our eyes, but there's still, you know, I finished 3 years ago, but now there's this agreement still going on RCEP, the Regional Cooperation Economic, I could never remember, Economic Partnership, but it's a trade agreement. And it's bigger than TPP, and it's got enormous prospect, but it needs India in there, China's in it, and all the ASEAN countries, and Japan and Korea and Australia and New Zealand. But the Indians have just stymied it again, and it's a bureaucracy. There's so much corruption in much of the bureaucracy. You know, you look after the RELs, so if you can move a piece of paper 5 times instead of 1, you do, and you have another person employed to do that. But I've seen them distort trade efforts, freeing up trade efforts all over the world for several years now. I thought with Modi winning a second time, and he's got a lot of authority, he had a lot the first time, but to have a lot more authority, that we'd see more action. I was personally expecting some movement, but I don't know. I mean, sooner or later, a lot of their growth, which has been phenomenal, also has come from internal. They're such a big internal market in its own right. But to go further, they've got to start opening up. Now, Modi and others understand that, so it is a matter of time when they have to go to open up to the rest of the world. You know, what's happening in India, for instance, is 30 people every minute of every day, of every week, 30 people are moving from the regional areas to the cities. And if you go and do the sums, that's 43,000 people left regional area and went to the city since this time yesterday. Right? Over 20 years, which they think this exodus or migration from the rural areas to the cities are going to keep going, that's 310 million people over the 20 years. So you've got China happening all over again. You know, so for iron ore and coking coal, that's a great story. But for things like sheep meat and other dairy products, it's all value add stuff, high end. There's real opportunities, but I'm sorry, it's not there yet.
All right, that's all we have time for. Sorry, I've got the wind up from the bosses here. So if you have a burning question, come and hit us up directly afterwards, please. But for now, I think we've got lunch in front of us, so let's wrap it up. But thanks everyone for coming to our session, and please put your hands together and thank our guests, Andrew, Rob and Lachie Grant.
Yeah.